The carriage wheels had barely stopped turning when Marcus Greaves, Duke of Aldridge, realized his sister was about to ruin his afternoon. Again. "You cannot possibly expect me to spend 2 hours listening to Mr. Whitmore recite poetry," Beatrice said, adjusting her bonnet with the precise movements of someone preparing for battle. "You know he rhymes heart with depart in every single verse." Marcus didn't look up from the correspondence he'd brought specifically to avoid this conversation. "You accepted his invitation to promenade in Hyde Park. I am merely fulfilling my brotherly duty as chaperone." "Your brotherly duty?" Beatrice's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. "You've forgotten what sunlight looks like, Marcus. The steward mentioned you fell asleep at your desk twice last week. This is an intervention disguised as courtesy." "I did not fall asleep. I was resting my eyes while reviewing the same agricultural reports you've read 17 times. She plucked the letter from his hands before he could protest. "Mr. Whitmore is perfectly harmless, delightfully boring, and will occupy precisely 90 minutes of our time. You will smile. You will nod. You will remember that dukes are occasionally required to exist in society, rather than hiding behind ledgers like frightened clerks." Marcus considered arguing. Then he considered the alternative. Returning to Aldridge House, where his secretary waited with another stack of contracts requiring his signature, his man of business lurked with questions about the northern properties, and his grandmother had already sent 3 notes about his continued unmarried state. Hyde Park in March suddenly seemed tolerable. 90 minutes, he said. "I knew you'd see reason." Beatrice's smile was triumphant. "And who knows? Perhaps something interesting will actually happen." Nothing interesting ever happened during Beatrice's manufactured courtships. She collected suitors the way other women collected sheet music, with enthusiasm and no intention of committing to any particular selection. Marcus had long since stopped trying to understand his sister's logic. She claimed she was helping him escape his self-imposed imprisonment. He suspected she simply enjoyed torturing him. Hyde Park was performing its usual afternoon theatre when they arrived. The fashionable hour meant the paths were crowded with ladies in pastel silks, gentlemen on glossy horses, and enough desperate social climbing to fuel a dozen seasons. Mr. Whitmore appeared instantly, as if he'd been waiting behind a tree. Possibly he had been. "Lady Beatrice." He bowed so deeply Marcus worried about the man's spine. "And your Grace. What an unexpected pleasure." It was not unexpected. Beatrice had arranged this 3 days ago, but Marcus manufactured an appropriate smile and fell into step behind them as Mr. Whitmore launched into what sounded like the opening stanza of something rhyming spring with everything. Beatrice caught his eye over her shoulder. Her expression promised retribution if he didn't at least pretend to pay attention. He was attempting to look engaged, and failing, when he saw them. Oliver Fairmont, Viscount Langford, was walking toward them on the main path. Oliver, his closest friend since Eton, who was supposed to be in Sussex for another week visiting his mother. Oliver, whose letters Marcus had been answering between agricultural reports and estate business. Oliver, who had a woman on his arm. Not just any woman, Isla Brennan. Marcus's brain performed several calculations simultaneously, none of them productive. Isla Brennan, whose father owned shipping interests and a respectable fortune. Isla Brennan, who had been suggested as a potential match for him exactly 8 weeks ago. Isla Brennan, whom he'd met exactly 3 times, twice at formal dinners where she'd been seated 6 places away, once at a garden party, where he'd been called away after 10 minutes to discuss urgent business with his steward. Isla Brennan, who had dark auburn hair that caught the afternoon light, grey-green eyes that had seemed far too perceptive during their brief conversations, and a laugh he'd heard once across a crowded ballroom, and then spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to hear again. Isla Brennan, who was currently looking up at Oliver with an expression Marcus couldn't quite decipher. And Oliver. Oliver had his hand on her arm. The casual, comfortable touch of someone who had earned the right to such familiarity. Something cold and sharp lodged itself beneath Marcus's ribs. "Is that Lord Langford?" Beatrice's voice was delighted. She'd already abandoned Mr. Whitmore mid-stanza. "Marcus, it's Oliver, and oh." Her pause was deliberate. "Isn't that Miss Brennan? The young lady you were supposed to court before you disappeared into your study for 6 consecutive weeks?" Marcus was going to murder his sister. Slowly. "I did not disappear," he said through his teeth. "I was managing—" "Your Grace!" Oliver had spotted them. His grin was wide and entirely too pleased. "What extraordinary timing! I was just telling Miss Brennan about the property improvements at Aldridge. She was expressing interest in modern agricultural techniques." "Was she?" Marcus's voice came out flat. He forced something resembling warmth into his tone. "Miss Brennan. What a pleasant surprise." Isla's curtsy was perfectly correct. Her expression was perfectly neutral. Her eyes, when they met his, were perfectly unreadable. "Your Grace, Lady Beatrice." Her voice was lower than he remembered, smoother. "Lord Langford has been very educational about crop rotation." "Has he?" The cold thing beneath Marcus's ribs twisted. Oliver is endlessly educational about any number of subjects, particularly those he discovered last Tuesday. Oliver's laugh was easy. "Jealous that I read the agricultural journals you send me, unlike certain dukes who merely stack them on their desks?" "I read them. You use them as coasters." Beatrice made a sound that might have been a cough or might have been suppressed laughter. Mr. Whitmore looked confused. Isla's mouth curved slightly at one corner. That small, almost smile did something unfortunate to Marcus's already compromised composure. "We should continue our walk," he said abruptly. Then, because the words were forming before his brain could stop them, "Unless you'd care to join us, all of you, I mean, for the remainder of the promenade." Beatrice's head swiveled toward him so fast her bonnet ribbons fluttered. Oliver raised one eyebrow. Isla tilted her head slightly, studying him with those too perceptive eyes. "How kind," she said, "but we wouldn't want to impose on Lady Beatrice's time with Mr. Whitmore." "Oh, Mr. Whitmore won't mind," Beatrice said instantly. "Will you, Mr. Whitmore?" Mr. Whitmore, who clearly minded very much, made a strangled sound of agreement. They fell into an awkward formation, Mr. Whitmore and Beatrice in front, Oliver and Isla in the middle, Marcus bringing up the rear like some kind of aristocratic shepherd. He could see the back of Isla's head, the way her hair was pinned in an elegant coil that left the nape of her neck exposed. Oliver said something that made her laugh. The cold, sharp thing became several cold, sharp things. This was absurd. He barely knew Isla Brennan. Their courtship, if it could even be called that, had been a suggestion from her father and his grandmother, nothing more. He'd been busy with the northern properties, with the drainage issues, with the tenant disputes that required his immediate attention. He'd meant to call on her properly once matters were settled, except matters were never settled. And now Oliver was here, touching her arm, making her laugh, being everything Marcus apparently wasn't. "You've been quiet?" Oliver called over his shoulder. "Are you composing one of your famously thrilling observations about weather patterns?" "I'm observing that you returned from Sussex earlier than expected," Marcus said. "One might wonder what prompted such a sudden change in plans." "One might wonder." Oliver's grin was infuriating. "Or one might simply accept that London in spring is infinitely preferable to Sussex in any season." Isla said something too quiet for Marcus to hear. Oliver leaned closer to listen. Marcus's hands curled into fists inside his gloves. They were approaching the Serpentine. The afternoon sun turned the water into hammered gold. Fashionable couples dotted the banks like well-dressed chess pieces. Marcus's mind was racing through possibilities, each one more ridiculous than the last. He could invite them to dinner. No, too formal, too easily declined. He could suggest drinks at his club. No, that excluded the women. He could... "Lady Beatrice," he heard himself say. "Didn't you mention that house party? The one you were planning for next week?" The silence that followed was profound. Beatrice turned slowly. Her expression was a masterpiece of confusion. "I'm sorry, what?" "The house party," Marcus continued, committed now to whatever madness had possessed him. "At Aldridge Manor. You said you'd invited several guests for a week of activities." He paused, then played his final card. "You specifically mentioned wanting to introduce Mr. Whitmore to the estate, so he could better appreciate your interests." He watched realization dawn in his sister's eyes, then calculation, then something that looked dangerously close to delight. "Oh," she said slowly. "That house party. Yes, that one." Marcus turned to Oliver and Isla. "It would be our pleasure if you both would join us. Oliver, you're practically family. And Miss Brennan," he met her eyes, "I believe you mentioned an interest in landscape design during our last conversation. The Aldridge Gardens are quite extensive." He had no idea if she'd mentioned landscape design. He wasn't entirely sure they'd had a last conversation, but Isla's eyebrows rose fractionally, and something flickered in her expression that might have been amusement, or might have been challenge. "How thoughtful," she said. "Though I'd hate to impose on a family gathering." "Not at all," Beatrice said. Her voice was bright with barely suppressed laughter. "In fact, I insist, and I'll be inviting two of my dearest friends as well, Lady Thornbury and Miss Caroline Ashworth. We'll make quite a party of it." Mr. Whitmore looked like he wanted to expire on the spot. Oliver's expression had shifted from amused to speculative. Isla was still watching Marcus with that unreadable look. "Well," Oliver said finally, "when you put it like that, how could we possibly refuse? Miss Brennan?" Isla held Marcus's gaze for one more moment. Then she smiled. A real smile this time, bright and sharp as a blade. "It sounds delightful," she said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Marcus felt something that might have been triumph, or might have been terror, possibly both. He'd just invented an entire house party, complete with guests and activities, for the sole purpose of preventing his best friend from courting a woman he'd barely bothered to notice until approximately 10 minutes ago. Beatrice was going to destroy him. But as they continued walking, Isla glancing back once over her shoulder with an expression he couldn't quite read, Marcus decided destruction might be worth it, as long as she was looking at him instead of Oliver. The carriage ride back to Aldridge House provided Beatrice with ample opportunity for interrogation. She waited exactly 45 seconds after the door closed before launching her attack. "What?" she said. "Was that?" Marcus focused intently on the passing buildings. "I have no idea what you're referring to. You invented an entire house party in the middle of Hyde Park. You're always complaining I don't entertain enough. I complain that you don't leave your study. There's a significant difference." Beatrice leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with sisterly malice. "And then you invited your closest friend and the woman you completely ignored during your attempted courtship, the same woman who is apparently now being courted by said closest friend. I didn't ignore her. I was occupied with pressing estate matters. You fell asleep reading crop reports. That was one time. Twice. The steward told me." Beatrice's smile was triumphant. "But please, continue explaining how this imaginary house party serves any purpose other than your wounded pride." Marcus had no good answer, mostly because Beatrice was exactly right, and they both knew it. He'd seen Isla on Oliver's arm and felt something he hadn't felt in years. The sharp, uncomfortable awareness that he'd made a mistake, that he'd let something slip away through pure inattention, and now someone else was claiming what he'd been too busy to notice. It was absurd. It was irrational. It was beneath him. It was also apparently strong enough to make him lie to 4 people in the middle of London's most popular park. "I'm simply being hospitable," he said. "You're being insane." But Beatrice was grinning now. "However, since you've committed us to this spectacular disaster, I suppose we'd better make it convincing. I'll write to Caroline and Lady Thornbury tonight. They'll be delighted. They've been begging to visit Aldridge since the renovation's finished. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You realize you've just trapped yourself in a week of enforced socializing. With the woman you ignored and the friend who is apparently courting her, this is going to be a catastrophe. It will be fine. It will be hilarious." Beatrice settled back against the cushions, looking far too pleased. "Oh, Marcus, I knew getting you out of the house would be beneficial. I just didn't expect it to be this entertaining." Marcus closed his eyes. He had 3 days to prepare Aldridge Manor for a house party that didn't exist, explain the situation to his staff without revealing he'd lost his mind, and figure out what exactly he planned to do once everyone arrived. He had no strategy, no plan, no reasonable explanation for any of this. He only had the memory of Isla's smile, bright and challenging, and the uncomfortable certainty that he'd do it all again. Aldridge Manor rose from the Derbyshire landscape like something from a painting. All honey-coloured stone, mullioned windows, and carefully manicured grounds that spoke of old money and older titles. Marcus had spent his childhood running wild through those grounds, hiding from tutors in the maze, climbing the ancient oak that still stood sentinel near the east wing. Now he stood in the entrance hall, watching his housekeeper direct an army of maids in last-minute preparations. and wondered if he'd completely lost his mind. "The blue rooms for the ladies," Mrs. Hensworth was saying, her tone brooking no argument. "The green suite for Lord Langford," and she paused, consulting her list. "Your Grace, you've placed Mr. Whitmore in the west wing. That's quite far from the family rooms." "Yes," Marcus said, "that's intentional." Mrs. Hensworth's expression suggested she had opinions about this, but was too professional to voice them. "As you wish, Your Grace. The conservatory has been aired as requested, and Cook has prepared enough provisions for a small army. Knowing my sister's appetite for drama, we'll need them." The sound of carriage wheels on gravel interrupted any response. Marcus's stomach performed an uncomfortable maneuver. He'd spent 3 days preparing the house, writing to his steward about freeing his schedule, and absolutely failing to come up with any rational explanation for his behavior. Beatrice appeared at his elbow, resplendent in yellow muslin that made her look like concentrated sunshine. "Ready to face the consequences of your impulsive decisions?" "I'm always ready." "You're never ready. That's what makes this so delightful." She squeezed his arm. "Try not to look like you're attending your own execution. It's unbecoming in a duke." The first carriage contained Beatrice's friends, Lady Thornbury, a cheerful widow of 25, who spent most of her time scandalizing society with her progressive opinions, and Miss Caroline Ashworth, who possessed the unusual combination of genuine kindness and vicious wit. They descended in a flurry of laughter and travelling cloaks, immediately overwhelming the entrance hall with energy. The second carriage brought Mr. Whitmore, who looked vaguely terrified. The third carriage brought Oliver, and Isla. She stepped down with the kind of natural grace that suggested she'd been descending from carriages her entire life, and found the process only mildly interesting. She wore deep blue that made her auburn hair seem to catch fire in the afternoon light. When she looked up at the house, her expression shifted to something Marcus couldn't quite identify. Wonder, perhaps. Or calculation. "Impressive," she said as he approached to greet them, "though I suspect you knew that already." "The house has been in the family for 8 generations, Marcus replied. "We've had time to make improvements. And yet somehow you never mentioned you lived in what appears to be a palace." Her tone was light, but something in her eyes suggested reproach. "During those 3 extensive conversations we had," Oliver laughed. Marcus is pathologically modest about the estate. "Took me 2 years before he'd even invite me to visit." "I'm not modest, I'm private." "You're both," Isla said, "which must make hosting imaginary house parties quite challenging." The words were soft enough that only Marcus heard them. He met her gaze and found something sharp and knowing there. She'd figured it out, of course she had. She was far too intelligent not to have questioned the sudden invention of an entire week of entertainment. "I assure you," he said quietly, "the house party is entirely real. My previous oversight was in not organizing one sooner." "How convenient that you remembered just as I happened to be walking in Hyde Park with Lord Langford, isn't it?" He offered his arm. "Shall I show you to your room? I'm told the blue suite has excellent views of the gardens you were so interested in." Her hand settled on his sleeve. Even through layers of fabric, he felt the contact like a brand. "I don't recall mentioning gardens," she said. "Then I must have imagined it. I imagine quite a lot lately, it seems." Her laugh was soft and surprised. "Careful, Your Grace. Honesty doesn't suit a man who invents social engagements on park paths." "Then it's fortunate we have a week for me to practice." They moved into the house, the rest of the party following in a chaos of greetings and luggage. Beatrice was already directing everyone toward their rooms, her organizational skills deployed with military precision. Oliver fell into step beside them, effectively ending any private conversation. "You've outdone yourself," Oliver said, looking around the entrance hall with its soaring ceiling and portrait-lined walls. "I'd forgotten how aggressively grand Aldridge is. We prefer elegantly appointed. You prefer impossible to compete with." Oliver's tone was teasing, but Marcus caught an edge beneath it, though I suppose that's always been true. Isla glanced between them, her expression thoughtful. "Do you two compete over everything?" "Only the important things," Oliver said. "Define important." "Cards. Horses. Who can recite poetry better?" Oliver grinned. "Marcus always wins at cards. I always win at poetry, and horses are generally a draw. How civilized." "We're extremely civilized." except when Marcus decides to be unpredictable and invent house parties without warning. Marcus felt Isla's fingers tighten fractionally on his arm. Some opportunities, he said carefully, require decisive action, or impulsive action masquerading as decisiveness, Oliver replied. It's a fine line. They'd reached the stairs. Beatrice was herding Lady Thornbury and Caroline toward the east wing, Mr. Whitmore trailing behind like a confused puppy. Mrs. Hensworth appeared to guide Isla toward her room, but Marcus found himself reluctant to release her arm. I hope the accommodations are satisfactory, he said. I'm sure they'll be more than adequate. She withdrew her hand slowly. Though I confess, I'm curious what activities you've planned for this week, since it was so carefully organized in advance. Oliver laughed outright. Marcus refused to acknowledge the heat climbing his neck. Tomorrow, he said, I thought we might begin with a morning ride. The estate has extensive trails and the weather should hold. How lovely. Isla's smile was polite and entirely too knowing. I assume Lord Langford rides. Like a centaur, Oliver confirmed. Though Marcus has home advantage, his horses know all his tricks. Then I look forward to seeing these tricks. She curtsied to them both. Gentlemen, until dinner. She followed Mrs. Hensworth up the stairs, her posture perfect, her head high. Marcus watched until she disappeared around the corner. So, Oliver said into the silence, are you going to tell me what this is actually about? It's a house party. Those typically don't require explanation. They do when they're invented on the spot by a man who hasn't hosted anything social in 3 years. Oliver's expression had shifted from amused to serious. And when they happen to include a woman you were meant to be courting, before you vanished into your ledgers. Marcus had known this conversation was coming. He'd prepared several reasonable explanations, each one more plausible than the last. What came out instead was, you were touching her arm. Silence. Then Oliver's eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. In Hyde Park. Yes, I was being polite. You were being familiar. I was preventing her from tripping on a loose stone. Oliver studied him with an expression caught between confusion and dawning realization. Good God, you're jealous. I'm not. Marcus stopped, started again. I'm aware I failed to properly pursue the courtship. You didn't fail to pursue it. You forgot it existed. I was occupied. You're always occupied, that's the problem. Oliver crossed his arms. And now what? You see me being pleasant to her, and suddenly remember she's worth your attention? It sounded damning when said aloud. It sounded worse because it was true. I made a mistake, Marcus said finally. I'm attempting to rectify it. By inventing an entire week of forced proximity. By creating an opportunity to correct my previous oversight. Oliver was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. You're an idiot. That's been established. But you're also my oldest friend. Oliver clapped him on the shoulder. So I'll make you a deal. I won't actively try to win her affections, despite the fact that I've been far more attentive than you have. But I'm also not going to simply hand her over like some kind of prize. If she prefers my company to yours, that's her choice. I wouldn't expect anything else. Yes, you would. You expect to win at everything because you usually do. Oliver's smile was wry. But Miss Brennan isn't a card game or a horse race. She's a woman who deserves someone who actually sees her. Can you be that person? Marcus thought about Isla's sharp eyes, her knowing smile, the way she'd called him out on his imaginary party without hesitation. He thought about how little he actually knew her and how much he wanted to change that. I intend to try, he said. Then may the best man win. Oliver held out his hand. Marcus shook it, feeling like he'd just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple wager. Dinner was a carefully orchestrated disaster. Beatrice had arranged the seating with what Marcus recognized as deliberate malice. She'd placed Isla between Oliver and Mr. Whitmore, with Marcus across the table where he could watch but not easily participate in conversation. Lady Thornbury held court at one end, Caroline Ashworth at the other, and Beatrice herself positioned strategically to observe all parties with the delighted attention of someone watching a particularly entertaining play. Miss Brennan, Mr. Whitmore was saying, have you read Wordsworth's latest collection? I find his treatment of natural imagery particularly evocative of the sublime pastoral ideal. Isla's expression suggested she'd rather discuss agricultural drainage. I confess I prefer Byron. His heroes have more personality than his landscapes. Byron! Mr. Whitmore's horror was immediate. But he's so interesting, Isla suggested. Scandalous, Oliver supplied helpfully, which is precisely why everyone reads him. I don't, Mr. Whitmore said. Then you're missing quite a lot of excellent scandal. Isla's smile was sweet. Lord Langford, you strike me as a man who appreciates a well-executed scandal. Am I correct? Distressingly correct. Oliver raised his wine glass, though I try to keep my own relatively tasteful. How disappointing. Marcus watched this exchange with growing irritation. Oliver was being charming. Isla was laughing. Mr. Whitmore looked increasingly confused, and Beatrice was barely containing her glee. Your Grace, Lady Thornbury said from down the table, Lady Beatrice mentioned you've made extensive improvements to the estate. What prompted such ambitious renovations? Marcus dragged his attention away from Isla's laugh. The tenant cottages were in disrepair. The drainage system was from the last century. Leaving them in that condition would have been irresponsible. How noble, Lady Thornbury said. And here I thought all young dukes spent their time gambling and hunting. Marcus prefers crop rotation to cards, Oliver said. It's less exciting, but more predictable. I prefer sustainable land management to destitute tenants, Marcus corrected. How radical, Isla said. Her tone was light, but when he met her eyes across the table, something in her expression had shifted. Interest, perhaps, or reassessment. Not radical. Decent. Decency can be radical when it's rare. She tilted her head slightly. How many landlords actually care if their tenants have functional cottages? Not enough. See, this is what I miss when I'm in London, Oliver interjected. The thrilling dinner conversation about sewage systems. Would you prefer Mr. Whitmore's insights into pastoral poetry? Beatrice asked innocently. Mr. Whitmore perked up. I would be happy to... We're quite satisfied with sewage, thank you, Caroline said quickly. Though perhaps after dinner we might transition to less sanitary topics. Laughter rippled around the table. Isla was still watching Marcus, her expression thoughtful. He wanted to ask what she was thinking. He wanted to continue their conversation from earlier, the one that had been interrupted by Oliver's arrival. He wanted to stop watching her smile at his best friend. The meal stretched on through several courses, each one accompanied by increasingly ridiculous conversation. Beatrice described her imaginary plans for the week. A morning ride tomorrow, archery in the afternoon, some kind of garden party she was inventing in real time. Mr. Whitmore suggested poetry readings. Lady Thornbury proposed cards. Oliver recommended they simply spend the week avoiding all structured activities and instead engage in what he termed civilized chaos. I think we have enough chaos already, Marcus said. Do we? Oliver's grin was knowing. I hadn't noticed. After dinner they adjourned to the drawing room. The ladies claimed the comfortable chairs near the fire. The gentlemen clustered near the windows with port and stilted conversation. Marcus found himself trapped between Mr. Whitmore's monologue about meter and Lady Thornbury's sharp political observations, neither of which he could properly focus on because Isla and Oliver were sitting too close together on the settee by the fire. They weren't doing anything scandalous. They were simply talking, heads bent together, Oliver saying something that made Isla laugh again with that bright, unguarded sound. Your Grace, Beatrice appeared at his elbow. You're glowering. I'm not. You are. You look like someone replaced all your agricultural reports with Gothic novels. She followed his gaze. Oh, that explains it. I have no idea what you're implying. You invited them here to keep Oliver away from her. Instead, you've trapped them together for a week in your own home. It's impressively counterproductive. Marcus had no defense against the truth. She's intelligent. Obviously. And Oliver is charming, attentive, and not emotionally allergic to courtship? Beatrice's tone was gentle despite the words. Marcus, you do realize that if you actually want her attention, you'll have to do more than glare from across the room? I'm not glaring. You're absolutely glaring, it's not subtle. She patted his arm. Tomorrow morning. The ride you mentioned. Make sure you're in the stables early. Suggest a route Oliver doesn't know. Be the person you are when you're not being a duke. The one who actually cares about things and talks to people like they matter. I always... No, you don't. You perform. You fulfill obligations. You recite correct responses while thinking about crop rotation. Beatrice squeezed his arm. But with her, when she's not around, you look different. Like you're actually awake. So be that person tomorrow. Or Oliver wins by default. She drifted away before he could respond, leaving Marcus alone with the uncomfortable accuracy of her observations. Across the room, Isla glanced up. Their eyes met. She said something to Oliver, stood, and crossed the room toward Marcus with the kind of purposeful grace that suggested she'd already decided exactly what she wanted to say. "Your Grace," she said when she reached him. "Thank you for dinner. And for this invitation." "You're welcome," he paused, "though I suspect you've determined it wasn't entirely planned." "Oh, I determined that the moment you invented it in Hyde Park." Her smile was sharp. "What I haven't determined is why. Honesty seemed like the only viable option, because I saw you with Oliver and realized I'd wasted an opportunity. To court me? To know you?" Something flickered in her expression. Surprise, perhaps, or suspicion. "You had 3 opportunities to know me. You spent them being professionally polite while clearly wishing you were somewhere else." "I know." The admission tasted like failure. "I was preoccupied. With crop rotation and drainage systems, I heard." She tilted her head. "And now you're suddenly interested because your friend is." "No." He stopped. Started again. "Perhaps that was the catalyst. But it's not the reason." "Then what is?" He wanted to say something clever, something ducal and appropriate. What came out instead was, "Your laugh. In the ballroom at the Weatherby party. I heard you laugh at something Lord Morton said, and I spent the rest of the evening trying to hear it again. But I was too busy being correct and dutiful and everything a duke is supposed to be. And then I saw you today with Oliver, and I realized I'd let correctness cost me something I didn't want to lose." Isla was very still. Then she said softly, "That's either very honest or very manipulative." "Honest. I'm terrible at manipulation." "Are you?" She studied him with those 2 perceptive eyes. "Because inventing an entire house party seems fairly manipulative. That was desperate, not manipulative." Her mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close. "I suppose there's a difference. A significant one. And now, what do you hope to accomplish with this week of forced proximity and imaginary activities?" He could lie. He could say something about hospitality or friendship or any of the dozen acceptable responses. Instead, he said, "I hope to convince you I'm worth a 4th chance." She was quiet for a long moment. Across the room, Oliver was watching them, his expression unreadable. Beatrice was pretending not to watch while very obviously watching. Lady Thornbury and Caroline had abandoned all pretense and were staring openly. "Well," Isla said finally, "that's certainly honest. Is it effective?" "I don't know yet." She took a step back, creating distance between them. "But I suppose we have a week to find out." She returned to her seat by the fire, leaving Marcus standing alone with the uncomfortable certainty that he'd just gambled everything on a woman he barely knew, and that somehow, terrifyingly, it felt exactly right. Morning arrived with relentless sunshine, and Beatrice pounding on his door at an hour no reasonable person should be awake. "You're going to the stables," she announced when he opened the door. "Now, before Oliver gets there first." Marcus, who had been awake for an hour, already planning exactly this strategy, nodded. "I'm aware." "Good. I've had the grooms saddle Apollo. He's flashy enough to impress, but calm enough that you won't die in front of everyone. Wear the blue coat, not the grey, and do try to smile occasionally. You look approachable when you smile." "Anything else?" "Yes. Stop overthinking. You're not negotiating a business contract. You're attempting to court a woman who is clearly intelligent enough to see through your nonsense." Beatrice pointed at him. "Be genuine. Be yourself. The version of yourself that actually cares about people, not the one who treats emotions like agricultural problems requiring systematic solutions." "I don't." "You absolutely do. Now go." I'll make sure the others take their time arriving. The morning was cool and crisp, the kind of early spring day that promised warmth later, but currently required a jacket. Marcus reached the stables to find them already alive with activity, grooms preparing horses, stable boys hauling tack, and standing near Apollo's stall already dressed in riding clothes was Isla. She looked up when he entered. "Your Grace, your sister said we were riding at 9. I'm afraid I'm appallingly punctual." "As am I." He moved toward Apollo, buying time. "I hope the accommodations were satisfactory?" "The room is beautiful, the view is beautiful, everything here is aggressively beautiful." She paused. "It makes me wonder what kind of man builds something this perfect and then hides inside it doing paperwork. The kind who inherited it at 23 and felt the weight of 8 generations watching, to see if he'd ruin everything." The honesty surprised them both. Isla's expression softened fractionally. "That sounds exhausting." "It is, and yet you do it anyway. Someone has to." "Does someone? Or do you simply believe that better than believing you have a choice?" The question landed with unexpected force. Marcus had spent 12 years being the Duke of Aldridge, fulfilling obligations, meeting expectations, never questioning whether he actually wanted any of it. "I've never thought about it like that," he admitted. "Perhaps you should." She moved to the horse the groom was preparing, a grey mare with intelligent eyes. "Is she mine for the week?" "Temperance, she's patient and clever. Rather like her rider, I suspect." Isla's laugh was soft. "Clever enough to notice you're already here before anyone else, planning your strategy, ensuring the horses were properly prepared." How dutiful. She accepted the groom's help mounting. Or how calculated. Can't it be both? "I suppose that depends on your intentions." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of voices announced the arrival of the others. Oliver appeared first, effortlessly elegant in riding clothes that made Marcus's own look faintly ridiculous by comparison. Behind him came Beatrice, Caroline, and Lady Thornbury. Mr. Whitmore had apparently declined, citing an aversion to early mornings and horses in general. "Perfect day for it," Oliver said, swinging onto his mount with practiced ease. "Marcus, you promised extensive trails. I'm holding you to that. The North Path offers the best views. We could ride to the Old Folly, it's about 2 hours there and back. Or, Isla said, we could split into smaller groups. Some might prefer a gentler pace than others." She was offering him an escape route, a chance to separate from Oliver, to ride with her alone. Marcus recognized the opportunity and the trap simultaneously. If he suggested she ride with him, it would be obvious manipulation. If he didn't, he'd spend 2 hours watching Oliver make her laugh. "Excellent idea," Beatrice said before he could speak. "Lady Thornbury and I will take the garden path. It's shorter, and we can gossip without startling the horses. Caroline, you're welcome to join us, or brave the more adventurous route." "I think I'll be adventurous," Caroline said. "Miss Brennan, shall we ride together? Let the gentlemen compete over who knows more impressive trails." Isla's smile suggested she knew exactly what was happening. Perfect. They set off in a loose formation, Caroline and Isla in front, Oliver and Marcus behind, Beatrice and Lady Thornbury peeling off toward the gardens with barely suppressed laughter. The morning air smelled of grass and possibility. Birds made optimistic sounds in the trees lining the path. "Well played," Oliver murmured. "Caroline's an excellent chaperone." "I wasn't." "You were absolutely trying to figure out how to get her alone without being obvious." "Don't worry, I was doing the same calculation." Oliver guided his horse closer. "This is going to be a very long week if we're both constantly maneuvering for position. Then perhaps we should simply let her decide. That would be the mature, reasonable approach." Oliver paused, "which is why neither of us will actually do it." He was right, and they both knew it. Ahead, Isla and Caroline were talking, their voices carrying back in fragments. Something about London, about family, about expectations. Marcus strained to hear more, but Oliver chose that moment to speak again. "She's impressive," he said quietly. "Quick-witted, doesn't suffer fools, sees through nonsense immediately." "Yes." "You realize that means she's already figured out this entire charade?" "I'm aware." "And she came anyway. That's either very forgiving or very curious." Oliver studied him. "What are you actually hoping for here?" Marcus watched Isla's straight back, The confident way she sat the horse, the tilt of her head as she listened to Caroline. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I want the chance to find out." "Fair enough." Oliver was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think you're an idiot for not pursuing her properly the first time. But I'm glad you're trying now, even though you're also trying. Especially because I'm also trying. Competition makes you better." Oliver's grin was sharp. "Though I should mention that I'm significantly better at courtship than you are. You're better at charm. There's a difference." "Is there? Because charm seems to be working quite well so far." Before Marcus could respond, Isla glanced back over her shoulder. "Are you two planning to sulk behind us the entire ride, or shall we actually see these impressive views you mentioned?" "Sulk is a strong word," Oliver called. "We prefer strategic positioning." "You prefer showing off," Caroline corrected. "Come on then, show us what Aldridge has to offer." Marcus urged Apollo forward, pulling alongside Isla. The path here was wide enough for 2 horses abreast, and Caroline tactfully fell back to ride with Oliver. "Your friend is wonderfully unsubtle," Isla said. "She's Beatrice's friend, which means subtlety was never an option." "Still, I appreciate the gesture." She studied the landscape unfolding around them, rolling hills, ancient trees, the careful management of land that spoke of generations of stewardship. "It's remarkable what you've done here. Your tenants must appreciate it." "They tolerate me." "That's not what I heard. Oliver mentioned you personally oversaw the cottage repairs, that you consulted with families about what they needed rather than deciding for them. It seemed logical. They live there. They'd know better than I would what required attention." "Logic." Her tone was dry. "Is that what you call basic human decency? It's not decent to do the bare minimum. It is when most landlords won't even do that." She was quiet for a moment. "My father owns several properties in London. I've seen how some landlords treat their tenants like problems to be managed rather than people to be respected. That's unconscionable. That's common." She glanced at him. "Which makes what you're doing here less common than you think." They rode in comfortable silence for a while. The path narrowed, forcing them closer together. Marcus was hyper-aware of the proximity, the sound of her breathing, the small movements of her hands on the reins, the way sunlight caught in her hair. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. During our previous encounters, if we can call them that, you were perfectly polite, perfectly correct, and perfectly absent." She met his eyes. What changed? He could deflect. He could offer some acceptable excuse. Instead, he said, "I saw someone else seeing you the way I should have from the beginning, and I realized that being correct and dutiful didn't matter if it meant losing the chance to know you. That's the second time you've said that, knowing me. Because it's true. I don't want to court you out of obligation, or because it's expected. I want to know who you are when you're not performing correctness for society's benefit. And you think a week at your estate will accomplish that? I think it's a better start than 3 formal dinners where I spent most of the time wishing I was somewhere else." Her laugh was surprised and genuine. "At least you're honest about it. Your friend Oliver has pointed out that I'm terrible at manipulation. Honesty seems like my only viable strategy." "Oliver is not my friend. He's pleasant company and an excellent conversationalist, but we've known each other less than a week." Something eased in Marcus's chest. "Good. Good. I mean..." He stopped, regrouped. "I mean, that's useful information." "Useful?" She was smiling now, bright and sharp. "You're really quite terrible at this." "At what?" "Courtship, competition, pretending you're not wildly jealous of your best friend." "I'm not..." He stopped, tried again. "Wildly is excessive. Is it?" She gestured ahead where Oliver and Caroline were riding, Oliver clearly telling some story that had Caroline laughing. "You've been watching him like he's a particularly aggressive agricultural problem." "I don't watch agricultural problems. I solve them. And how do you plan to solve this one?" The question hung between them, sharp and challenging. Marcus had no good answer. He had no strategy, no plan, no idea what he was doing beyond a desperate desire to stop being the kind of man who let opportunities slip away while he was busy being dutiful. "I don't know," he admitted. but I'm hoping to figure it out before the week is over." Isla studied him for a long moment. Then she said softly, "That's the most honest thing you've said since I arrived." "Is honesty enough?" "I don't know yet." She urged her horse forward, pulling slightly ahead. "But I suppose we'll find out." They rode on toward the folly, the morning stretching golden around them, and Marcus felt something dangerous taking root in his chest. Hope. The folly stood on a gentle rise overlooking the valley, a classical temple structure, all white columns and marble that had weathered beautifully over decades. Marcus's grandfather had built it as a romantic gesture for his grandmother. Now it served mostly as a destination for estate walks and a reminder that the Greaves family had once prioritized beauty over practicality. They dismounted near the base, the horses content to graze while the riders explored. Oliver immediately claimed the highest point, gesturing grandly at the view while describing it in terms that managed to be both accurate and unnecessarily dramatic. "He's very good at this," Isla said, watching Oliver perform. Marcus, who was helping secure the horses, grunted agreement. The grand gestures, the charming descriptions, making everything feel effortless. She turned to him. "You're not like that." "No." "Is that why you're worried?" He finished tying Apollo's reins before answering. "Should I be?" "That depends. Do you think women only want effortless charm?" "Some do." "Some do," she agreed, "but some prefer substance, consistency, someone who shows up, even if they're showing up awkwardly." "I've been showing up awkwardly my entire life." Her laugh was warm. "Then you've had plenty of practice." Caroline called down from the folly, something about the view being worth the ride. Oliver was attempting to climb one of the columns with more enthusiasm than sense. Marcus watched Isla watch them, trying to decipher her expression. "You could join them," he said. "I could." She didn't move. "But I'm curious about something." "What?" "Why you're not up there trying to outcompete Oliver. He's literally climbing architecture to impress everyone. This seems like exactly the moment for grand gestures." Marcus considered the folly, Oliver's ridiculous climbing, Caroline's encouragement. "Grand gestures aren't really my strength." "No. I'm better at—" He paused, searching for words. "Persistent attention to detail, showing up consistently, making sure things work. How romantic." "It's not meant to be romantic. It's meant to be honest. Honesty can be romantic." Isla moved toward the folly steps, and Marcus fell into step beside her. "If it's the right kind of honesty." "What's the right kind?" "The kind that costs something, not just the easy truths anyone can speak. The ones that make you vulnerable." They'd reached the base of the steps. Above, Oliver had successfully scaled the column and was now delivering what sounded like classical poetry to the surrounding landscape. Caroline was laughing. The morning sun turned everything golden. "I'm terrified," Marcus said quietly. Isla stopped. "Of what?" "That I've already lost. That I wasted my chance weeks ago when I chose ledgers over conversation. That you'll spend this week realizing Oliver is everything I'm not. Charming, effortless, present, and I'll have successfully orchestrated my own defeat." She was very still. Then she said, "That's either very vulnerable or very manipulative. Honest. I'm terrible at manipulation, remember?" "Are you?" She tilted her head. "Because admitting fear is a very effective strategy." "It's only a strategy if it's calculated. This is just—" He gestured helplessly. "True." Above them, Oliver called down, "Are you two planning to sulk at the bottom all day, or shall you actually join us?" Isla's mouth curved. "He really does make everything an event." "It's exhausting." "Is it? Or is it just different from your approach?" "Both." She laughed, that bright, unguarded sound he'd been chasing since the Weatherby ballroom. "Come on then. Let's see if you can climb steps as dramatically as Oliver." "I absolutely cannot." "Then don't. Just climb them like yourself." They ascended together, Marcus hyper-aware of her presence beside him. At the top, the view opened up. Miles of Derbyshire landscape, the estate spread below like a living map, fields and forests, and the distant shimmer of the river cutting through it all. "Oh," Isla breathed. "This is—" "Worth the awkward climb?" Marcus supplied. "Worth considerably more than that." She moved to the edge, one hand on a column for balance, and simply looked. Oliver had abandoned his poetry to stand with Caroline, both of them pointing at something in the distance. For a moment, Marcus had Isla's attention entirely to himself. "My grandfather built this for my grandmother," he said. She complained that the house was too formal, too full of expectations. She wanted somewhere she could just be herself without 8 generations watching. Did it work? According to family legend, yes, they'd come here together, away from duties and obligations. Just the two of them and the view. That sounds lonely. Or liberating. She glanced at him. "Which do you think it was?" "I think it was both, and I think she loved him enough to choose liberation together over loneliness apart." That's quite romantic for a man who claims grand gestures aren't his strength. "It's not my gesture. It's my grandfather's. So I'm just the custodian of it. Still, you understand what it meant. That counts for something." She was quiet for a moment, still looking at the landscape. "Thank you for bringing us here. Thank you for coming, despite knowing I invented the entire week on the spot." "Oh, I didn't come despite that." Her smile was sharp. "I came because of it. A man who invents an entire house party out of jealousy is either a spectacular fool or someone finally paying attention. I wanted to know which." "Have you decided?" "Not yet." She turned to face him fully. "But I'm leaning toward a third option." "Which is?" "Both. Spectacularly foolish and finally paying attention." Oliver chose that moment to suggest they head back. Something about archery equipment being prepared. Beatrice's insistence that they maintain her fictional schedule. The return ride was faster, easier, filled with the kind of comfortable conversation that comes when people stop performing quite so hard. But Marcus noticed Isla glancing at him more often, noticed the way she laughed when he made dry observations about Oliver's dramatic descriptions, noticed that when the path narrowed again, she didn't pull ahead. Small things, barely noticeable. Except he was noticing everything now. Archery, it turned out, was a terrible idea. Not because anyone was bad at it, though Mr. Whitmore managed to shoot 3 arrows directly into the ground, but because it created exactly the kind of competitive environment that turned Oliver and Marcus into their most insufferable selves. "£5 says I can hit the center," Oliver announced, testing his bowstring with theatrical precision. "You've never hit the center in your life," Marcus replied. "I've hit it dozens of times. Once, at your sister's birthday party, and you were aiming for the outer ring." Details. Oliver knocked his arrow, took aim, and released. The arrow buried itself solidly in the second ring. Close enough. Not even remotely close enough. Isla, standing with Caroline and Beatrice at a safe distance, made a sound that might have been amusement or exasperation. "Do they always compete like this?" "Always," Beatrice confirmed. "Last Christmas, Marcus challenged Oliver to see who could carry more firewood. Oliver threw out his back. Marcus refused to admit he'd done the same until he literally couldn't stand up straight at dinner. That sounds painful and stupid. That's an excellent summary of their friendship." Marcus took his position, aware that everyone was watching. He'd been practicing archery since he was 12. His form was technically perfect. He should be able to make this shot without thinking. Except Isla was watching, and Oliver was grinning, and Marcus's usual confidence had apparently decided to abandon him entirely. The arrow hit the outer ring. Oliver's laugh was delighted. The Duke of Aldridge, defeated by his own nervous system. Wind changed. "There's no wind. Microscopic wind. You wouldn't notice." "I'm noticing you're making excuses." Isla stepped forward before Marcus could respond. "May I try?" Both men froze. Beatrice's expression suggested Christmas had come early. "Of course," Oliver said, recovering first. "Though I should warn you, archery is deceptively difficult." Isla took the bow, tested the weight, adjusted her stance with the kind of casual competence that suggested she'd done this before. She drew back the string, held for one breath, two. The arrow struck the center, perfect silence. Then Caroline started laughing. Beatrice joined her. Lady Thornbury, who had been reading under a tree, looked up with interest. Mr. Whitmore appeared confused, as if women hitting targets wasn't something his poetry had prepared him for. "Well," Isla said, returning the bow to Oliver, "that was fun." "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" Marcus asked. "My father has an estate in Scotland. I spent summers there as a girl. Archery, riding, fishing, everything except sitting still and being decorative. She smiled sweetly. Did you assume I couldn't? I assumed nothing. You assumed I'd need instruction, Oliver said. We both did, and now we've been thoroughly humiliated. Not humiliated, educated. Isla glanced between them. Though I confess I'm curious why you're both so determined to compete over everything. Does one of you actually win, or do you just keep score indefinitely? We keep score, Marcus admitted. Indefinitely, Oliver added. Current tally is roughly even, though I maintain that Marcus cheats by being better at things that require sustained attention, and Oliver cheats by being naturally charming. That's not cheating, that's genetics, Isla laughed, that bright, unguarded sound. You're both ridiculous. We prefer dedicated to excellence, Oliver said. You prefer showing off. But her tone was affectionate rather than critical, though I suppose there are worse hobbies. The afternoon dissolved into increasingly ridiculous competitions. Who could shoot while standing on one leg? No one successfully. Who could hit the target backwards? Oliver came closest, mostly by accident. Who could convince Mr. Whitmore to try again? Caroline won that one through sheer persistence and gentle encouragement. Somewhere during the chaos, Marcus realized something had shifted. The sharp edge of competition with Oliver had softened into something more like performance. They were showing off for Isla, yes, but also making her laugh. And that laughter felt like its own kind of victory. When they finally abandoned the archery field, Isla fell into step beside Marcus. Oliver was ahead with Caroline, arguing about something technical related to arrow trajectories. Beatrice and Lady Thornbury had already disappeared toward the house, probably to gossip about the day's events. You're better than you showed, Isla said quietly. How do you know? Because you were aiming for the center when you hit the outer ring. Your form was perfect. Your release was clean. You just tensed at the last second. Observant. One of my few talents. She glanced at him. Why did you tense? He could lie. He could blame the equipment or the angle or any number of external factors. Instead, he said, because you were watching and I wanted to be impressive, and that wanting made me worse at the thing I'm normally competent at. She was quiet for a moment. Then, that's either very honest or very calculated. We've established I'm terrible at calculation. Have we? Because inventing this entire week suggests otherwise. That wasn't calculated, that was desperate improvisation. There's a difference? A significant one. Calculation requires planning. I had no plan. I just saw you with Oliver and couldn't bear the thought of having lost something I'd never properly tried to have. They'd reached the terrace. Ahead, Oliver was demonstrating something with increasingly elaborate hand gestures. Caroline was laughing. The afternoon sun slanted gold across the stone. You keep saying that, Isla said. Lost something, but you can't lose what you never had. Can't you? I think that's the worst kind of loss. Losing possibility. Losing the chance to discover what might have been. She studied him with those too perceptive eyes. And now, what do you think might be? I don't know, but I'd like the chance to find out. Even if it means competing with your best friend? I'm not competing with Oliver anymore. No? She raised one eyebrow. Then what was all that archery nonsense? That was different. We were performing for you, not against each other. Is there a difference? I think so. One is about winning, the other is about being worth watching. Her expression softened fractionally. You're surprisingly good at this when you're being honest. Good at what? Courtship, connection, whatever this is. She gestured between them. The awkward, overly honest version suits you better than the correct ducal one. Most people prefer the ducal version. I'm not most people. No, he agreed, you're really not. They stood there for a moment, the sounds of the house party drifting around them. Oliver's laughter, Caroline's response, Beatrice calling something about dinner preparations. The day had dissolved into comfortable chaos, exactly as Oliver had predicted. But Marcus found he didn't mind. Not if it meant standing here with Isla, the afternoon light turning her hair to copper, her expression open and thoughtful and genuinely present. I'm going to change for dinner, she said finally. Try not to let Oliver get into too much trouble without supervision. That's impossible. Trouble is his natural state. Then at least make sure it's entertaining trouble rather than dangerous trouble. I'll do my best. She moved toward the house, then paused, glanced back. For what it's worth. I'm glad you invented this week, even if you did it for ridiculous reasons. Ridiculous? Jealousy is rarely rational. I prefer belated recognition of value. Her laugh floated back as she disappeared into the house. You can prefer whatever you want. It's still jealousy. She wasn't wrong. But Marcus found he didn't particularly care about the accuracy of the label. He cared that she was here, that she was laughing, that she'd called his honesty surprisingly good. That was enough, for now. Dinner that night was less orchestrated than the previous evening, possibly because Beatrice had given up on formal seating arrangements in favor of letting everyone sit where they wanted. This resulted in Isla between Caroline and Lady Thornbury, Oliver across from them, and Marcus at the head of the table where he could observe but not easily participate. Again, Beatrice caught his eye and shrugged, as if to say, "You're the one who invented this disaster. I'm just enjoying it." "Miss Brennan," Lady Thornbury was saying, "I heard you demolish the gentleman at archery. Please tell me there are details worth gossiping about." "Only if you consider watching grown men realize they've underestimated someone worth gossiping about," Isla replied. "That's always worth gossiping about. How badly did they lose?" "Thoroughly. Though to their credit, they recovered with humor rather than sulking." "That's because Oliver has never met a humiliation he couldn't laugh about," Marcus said, "and I've had extensive practice being wrong." "Only recently," Oliver added, "you used to be insufferable about being right." "I'm still right. I've just accepted that being right doesn't prevent me from being an idiot." Laughter rippled around the table. Isla was smiling again, that bright, sharp expression that suggested she was enjoying this far more than she'd expected to. The meal progressed through several courses, conversation flowing easily. Mr. Whitmore attempted twice to steer discussion toward poetry and was gently redirected both times. Caroline shared scandalous gossip from London. Lady Thornbury offered pointed political observations. Beatrice orchestrated everything with the casual skill of someone who'd been managing social disasters her entire life. And through it all, Marcus watched Isla. Watched the way she listened. Really listened, not just waiting for her turn to speak. Watched how she made everyone feel included, even Mr. Whitmore with his desperate poetry and obvious discomfort. Watched her laugh at Oliver's jokes and then turn that same warm attention to Caroline's stories. She was kind, genuinely kind, not just polite. He'd known she was intelligent. He'd known she was beautiful. He hadn't properly understood that she was kind until now. "Your Grace," Lady Thornbury said, pulling him from his observations. "You've gone quiet. Are you plotting something or simply overwhelmed by the chaos?" "Neither. Just thinking." Dangerous pastime for a duke. "Why?" "Because thinking leads to feeling, and feeling leads to poor decisions." She raised her glass. "Far better to remain comfortably numb and make terrible choices for purely logical reasons." "I think I've been doing exactly that for years." "Have you? Well then, perhaps it's time for a change." She turned back to her conversation with Caroline, leaving Marcus with the uncomfortable accuracy of her observation. He had been making logical choices, avoiding feeling, maintaining comfortable numbness disguised as responsibility. Until 3 days ago in Hyde Park, when comfortable numbness had shattered against the reality of Isla's laugh and Oliver's touch on her arm. After dinner, they gathered again in the drawing room. Someone suggested cards. Oliver proposed a game that involved increasingly complicated rules and what appeared to be the opportunity for creative cheating. Marcus found himself partnered with Isla against Oliver and Caroline. "Fair warning," Isla said as they settled into position. "I'm very good at cards." "That's fine, I'm very good at following rules. These rules are more like suggestions." "Then I'm doomed." Her laugh was soft. "Probably, but we'll lose entertainingly." They didn't lose. Isla played with the kind of strategic brilliance that suggested she'd been hustling them all, and Marcus found himself actually enjoying cards for the first time in years. Not because of winning, though that helped, but because of the way Isla's eyes lit up when she made a clever play, the way she celebrated their small victories, the way she didn't gloat when Oliver made a mistake. You're surprisingly good at this, Oliver said, after their third consecutive victory. You're surprisingly bad at recognizing your own tells, Isla replied. I don't have tells. You absolutely have tells. You lean forward when you're bluffing and back when you're confident. It's extremely obvious. Oliver looked genuinely shocked. Marcus, is this true? I've been exploiting that tell for 15 years, Marcus confirmed. And you never mentioned it. Why would I? It's advantages like that which maintain our roughly even score. The game dissolved into good-natured accusations and arguments about fairness and friendship. Watching Oliver and Isla bicker, Marcus realized something that should have been obvious. They were friends. Real friends, comfortable and easy with each other, in the way that suggested genuine affection without romantic tension. Oliver wasn't trying to win Isla's heart. He was just being himself, charming and present, and everything Marcus usually wasn't. The realization should have been reassuring. Instead, it made everything more complicated. Because if Oliver wasn't actually competition, that meant Marcus's only real obstacle was himself. The next 2 days followed a similar pattern, mornings spent in various outdoor activities, afternoons dissolving into chaos and laughter, evenings gathered in comfortable proximity, while Beatrice orchestrated and observed and clearly enjoyed watching Marcus fumble his way through courtship. On the third day, Marcus made a decision. He found Isla after breakfast, reading in the conservatory, the glass-walled structure that overlooked the gardens, filled with exotic plants his mother had collected before her death. She looked up when he entered, a finger marking her place in what appeared to be a philosophy text. "Your Grace," she said, "come to check on your plants. Come to check on you, actually." He moved closer, the humid warmth of the conservatory wrapping around them. "I wanted to apologize." "For what?" "For orchestrating this entire week under false pretenses. For inventing activities and house parties, and forcing you into proximity with someone who clearly didn't value your time when he had the chance." She closed the book. "That's quite a comprehensive apology. I've had 3 days to prepare it, and now you're delivering it in a conservatory because you're here, and because I've learned that waiting for the perfect moment means I never actually do anything." He paused. "Also, Oliver mentioned you'd asked about the orchids. I thought you might appreciate seeing them properly. So this is part apology, part botanical tour. Is that acceptable?" Her smile was soft. "It's very you. Awkward and honest and somehow endearing despite being slightly ridiculous. I'll take that as a yes." He showed her the orchids, rare specimens from 3 continents, his mother's pride, now carefully maintained by the head gardener. Isla listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed actual knowledge rather than polite engagement. "Your mother had excellent taste," she said, studying a particularly elaborate purple bloom. "She said plants were easier than people. They told you what they needed, and if you provided it, they flourished. That's not really true, though, is it? Plants are just as complicated as people. They just show it differently." "Perhaps." He paused. "I've been thinking about what you said, about choosing to come here despite knowing I'd invented everything. Have you reached any brilliant conclusions? Only that I've wasted an enormous amount of time trying to be the right kind of duke instead of figuring out how to be an actual person. Those aren't mutually exclusive, aren't they? Everyone expects the duke. The correct responses, the proper behavior, the appropriate distance. Being a person, messy and uncertain and occasionally foolish, doesn't fit that image." Isla moved to another plant, a climbing vine with star-shaped flowers. "And now?" "Now I'm standing in a conservatory apologizing to a woman who deserves better than my previous inattention, and I have no idea if anything I'm doing is working." "What would working look like?" "You not looking at me like you're waiting for me to disappoint you again." She turned to face him fully. "Is that what you think I'm doing? Isn't it? I ignored you during courtship, invented a house party out of jealousy, spent 3 days competing with my best friend for your attention. That's not exactly a promising pattern." "No, it's not." She moved closer. "But it's also not disappointing. Disappointing would be if you hadn't learned anything. If you were still the man who chose ledgers over conversation and thought that was acceptable. And now you're the man who invents house parties and admits to jealousy and stands in conservatories delivering awkward apologies." Her smile was gentle. "That's not disappointing. That's actually trying." The words landed with unexpected weight. Marcus had spent 3 days terrified he'd already lost, that his previous failures had made this entire week a futile exercise in public humiliation. But Isla wasn't looking at him with pity or judgment. She was looking at him with something that might have been affection. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "Do what?" "Court you. Be charming. Compete with Oliver's effortless charisma." "Then don't. Compete with Oliver, I mean. Just be yourself, the awkward, honest version who admits when he's uncertain." She paused. "That's the version I'm actually interested in. Even though he's terrible at grand gestures? Especially because he's terrible at grand gestures. Grand gestures are easy. Their performance, showing up consistently, admitting uncertainty, actually listening, that's harder, that's real." They stood there, surrounded by his mother's careful collection, the morning sun filtering through glass, and Marcus felt something shift. Not resolution exactly, but possibility. The sense that maybe he hadn't completely ruined everything. "Can I show you something?" he asked. "Another botanical specimen?" "Something better. Something that's actually mine rather than inherited." He led her through the gardens to the far edge of the property, where a small stone building stood half hidden by trees. It had been a hunting lodge once, abandoned and crumbling, until Marcus had spent the last 2 years renovating it into something else entirely. "What is this?" Isla asked as he unlocked the door. "My escape. The place I come when being the Duke becomes too heavy." Inside, the space was simple but comfortable. A desk, shelves lined with books, windows overlooking the forest. But what dominated the room was the large table covered in architectural drawings, models, sketches. "These are plans for tenant housing," Isla said, moving closer to examine them. "You're designing cottages?" "Redesigning. The old ones were functional but barely. I wanted something better, more light, better ventilation, room for families to actually live rather than just exist." She studied the drawings with the same focused attention she'd given the orchids. "These are beautiful and practical. Have you built any yet?" 3 completed, 2 more under construction. I'm working with the families to adjust plans as we go. Turns out I was wrong about a lot of assumptions." "Like what?" "Like thinking more bedrooms was always better. Some families preferred larger common spaces. Some wanted separate cooking areas. Some just wanted better windows." He gestured at the scattered sketches. "I thought I knew what they needed. They taught me to listen instead." Isla touched one of the drawings, a small cottage with an unusual layout. "Who lives here?" "Family with 4 children and a grandmother. They needed space but also privacy. This design gives them both." "You care about this?" It wasn't a question. "Yes. More than the grand house and the title and all the things people expect from a duke. Those are responsibilities. This is," he searched for the word, "purpose, making something better, solving problems that actually matter to real people." She turned to face him. "Why haven't you shown this to anyone?" "Because it's not ducal, it's not elegant, it's just me, working on something that matters more than crop yields or property values, or maintaining appropriate aristocratic distance. It's you being an actual person." "Yes." "The version you thought people didn't want to see." "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment, still studying the drawings. Then she said, "You're wrong." "About what?" "About people not wanting this version. Or at least, about me not wanting this version." She met his eyes. "This is what I wanted to see during those 3 formal dinners. The person behind the title. The man who actually cares about things. I didn't know how to show you." "You do now." Something tightened in his chest. "Is this a grand gesture?" "No. It's better. It's you showing me who you actually are rather than performing who you think you should be." She smiled. "Though I admit it would have been nice to see this before you invented an entire house party out of jealousy. Would you have come? If I'd simply invited you here properly?" "I don't know, but I'm glad I came anyway." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Thank you for showing me this. The real Aldridge, the one that matters." They walked back to the house together, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in days, hope that maybe this wasn't a disaster, that maybe showing someone who he actually was, messy and uncertain and committed to things that mattered, was enough. that maybe Isla saw him, really saw him, and didn't look away. That evening, Beatrice announced a small ball for their final night. Nothing grand, just dancing and dinner, and an excuse to wear excessive amounts of silk. This meant the next day was consumed with preparations. The ballroom was aired and polished. Musicians were summoned from the nearest town. Cook began producing what appeared to be enough food for 3 times their actual number. Marcus spent most of the day trapped in meetings with his steward and man of business, though his mind kept drifting to Isla and the conservatory and the way she'd looked at his cottage designs like they mattered. It wasn't until late afternoon that he escaped to the gardens, desperate for air and silence. He found Oliver there instead, sitting on a bench overlooking the maze. "Hiding from your own house party?" Oliver asked. "Hiding from Beatrice's increasingly elaborate plans. She's transformed a simple dinner into something requiring 14 kinds of flowers and a string quartet. She's having fun. Let her." Oliver gestured to the space beside him. "Sit. You look like you're about to collapse." Marcus sat. They were quiet for a while, watching shadows lengthen across the lawn. "You're in love with her," Oliver said finally. "I barely know her." "That's not an answer." It wasn't. Marcus had spent the last 4 days avoiding that particular truth because naming it felt dangerous. Premature, completely irrational. "I think I could be," he admitted, "if given the chance." "You do realize that's terrifying?" "Why?" "Because you're Marcus Greaves. You plan everything. You calculate risk. You don't make impulsive decisions based on feeling." Oliver turned to look at him. "Except apparently you do when properly motivated." "Is that bad?" "It's alarming, but possibly good." Oliver was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, she's not in love with me. We're friends, nothing more." "I know." "Do you?" "Because you've been watching us like I'm about to steal her away at any moment." "Not anymore. I realized yesterday that you're just being yourself. I'm the one making it into competition." "Finally." Oliver's smile was wry. "Took you long enough, though I admit I wasn't helping. Hard to resist the urge to compete when you're so obviously desperate." "I'm not desperate. You invented an entire house party in 30 seconds. That's definitionally desperate." "Fair point." They sat in comfortable silence. Marcus felt something ease, the tight knot of competition and jealousy that had been driving him for days. Oliver wasn't the obstacle. He'd never been the obstacle. The obstacle was Marcus's own fear that he wasn't enough, that despite the estate and the title and the carefully maintained competence, he was still just someone fumbling through connection, hoping not to ruin everything. "She likes you," Oliver said, in case that wasn't obvious. "How do you know?" "Because she looks at you like you're a puzzle she's trying to solve. And yesterday, when you showed her whatever you showed her in that building by the woods, she came back different, softer, like she'd seen something worth seeing. The cottage plans." "The what?" "I'm redesigning tenant housing." She seemed interested. Oliver laughed. "Of course she did. And of course you thought showing her architectural drawings would be romantic. You're completely hopeless." "Is that bad?" "It's perfect for you." Oliver stood, stretching. "Just don't ruin this tomorrow by overthinking. Dance with her. Tell her how you feel. Stop being the Duke for 5 minutes and just be Marcus. And if I can't, then you deserve to lose." But Oliver's smile was kind. "Fortunately, I don't think you will." He left Marcus alone with the lengthening shadows and the weight of tomorrow. One more day. One more chance to show Isla that he could be someone worth choosing. He just had to not ruin it first. The ball was smaller than Beatrice's description had suggested, but more elegant. Candles turned the ballroom into something from a fairy tale. The musicians were actually good, and everyone had dressed in their finest silks and jewels, transforming the house party into something approaching a proper society event. Marcus stood at the edge of the ballroom, adjusting his cravat for the 3rd time, and felt profoundly out of place in his own house. "Stop fidgeting," Beatrice hissed, appearing at his elbow. "You look fine." "I look ridiculous." "You look ducal. There's a difference." She surveyed the room with satisfaction. "This turned out rather well, don't you think?" "You've outdone yourself. I know I'm expecting significant gratitude when this is over." She paused. "Have you seen Miss Brennan yet?" "No." "Well, prepare yourself. She's wearing blue, and she looks devastating." Oliver actually made a sound when he saw her. Possibly a whimper. That's not helpful. It's not meant to be helpful. It's meant to warn you that if you don't ask her to dance immediately, someone else will. Oliver said he's not... Not Oliver, you idiot. Mr. Whitmore has been gathering courage all evening. Caroline mentioned he's planning to recite poetry while dancing. The horror must be prevented. Before Marcus could respond, the musicians struck up a waltz. Couples began forming on the floor. And there, descending the stairs with Caroline, was Isla. Beatrice hadn't been exaggerating. The blue dress caught light and shadow in equal measure, turning Isla into something luminous. Her hair was pinned up, exposing the elegant line of her neck. She moved with that same natural grace he'd noticed in Hyde Park, but now, here in his house, surrounded by his family's history, she looked like she belonged, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. Their eyes met across the ballroom. She smiled, soft and genuine and a little uncertain. Marcus crossed the floor before conscious thought could interfere. "Miss Brennan," he said when he reached her, "would you do me the honor?" She placed her hand in his. "I thought you'd never ask." He led her onto the floor, hyper-aware of every point of contact, her hand in his other hand at her waist, the small distance between them that felt simultaneously too far and dangerously close. The music began. They moved into the waltz. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you, you look terrified." "I am terrified. Of dancing. Of ruining this. Again." He guided her through a turn, grateful for years of forced dancing lessons. "I keep thinking I'm about to say something idiotic and destroy whatever progress I've managed to make this week." "Progress?" Her tone was amused. "Is that what we're calling it? Would you prefer desperate attempt at courtship?" "That's more accurate, yes." They danced in silence for a moment. Marcus could feel the entire ballroom watching, Beatrice with her barely concealed glee, Oliver with supportive amusement, Caroline and Lady Thornbury with what appeared to be a running commentary, Mr. Whitmore with visible disappointment. "Everyone's staring," Isla said quietly. "They usually do. Occupational hazard of being a duke. Do you hate it? The staring or being a duke?" "Both." He considered the question seriously. "I hate the expectations. The assumption that I should be a certain way, perform a certain role, never deviate from what 8 generations of dukes have been. But the responsibility itself, taking care of the estate, the tenants, making sure things work, that I don't mind. Because it's purpose rather than performance." "Exactly." He was surprised she remembered. "Though lately I've been wondering if I can separate the two, be responsible without disappearing into the role." "You can. You have been this week." "Have I?" "Yes. The man who showed me his cottage plans, who admitted to desperate improvisation, who stands in conservatories delivering awkward apologies, that's someone real. That's someone I'd like to know better." Hope flared bright in his chest. "Would you want to know me better?" "That depends." "On what?" "On whether you're still performing. Whether this week has been genuine connection or just extended courtship strategy." The music swirled around them. Other couples moved past in blurs of color and motion. Marcus guided Isla through the steps automatically, his mind racing through careful responses, appropriate answers, all the things a duke should say when trying to win a woman's affections. Then he abandoned all of it. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said. "I don't have a strategy. I invented this week because I saw you with Oliver and realized I'd wasted my chance. And yes, that's jealousy. And yes, it's ridiculous. But everything since then has been me trying to show you who I actually am beneath the title. The uncertain, occasionally foolish person who cares about cottage designs and proper drainage and making sure people are seen." He paused, holding her gaze. "I'm not performing anymore, Isla. I'm just hoping you'll see me anyway, even though I have no idea if that's enough." She was very quiet. The waltz was ending, other couples beginning to applaud. But Isla didn't move, didn't step back. Instead, she said softly, "It's enough, you're enough." "Am I?" "Yes." Her smile was gentle. "Though I need you to understand something." "What?" I'm not some prize to be won in your competition with Oliver. I'm not a problem to solve or an opportunity to seize. I'm a person with my own doubts and fears and uncertainties. She squeezed his hand. If this is going to be real, not just a week of enforced proximity, but actual connection, it has to be because we both choose it, consciously, without games or strategies or desperate improvisation. I understand. Do you? Because it means I need time. Not forever, just time to be certain this isn't just you being impulsive again, that you're not going to disappear back into your ledgers the moment the house party ends and real life resumes. The words should have hurt. Instead, they felt like honesty, the kind that cost something, the kind she'd told him was romantic. How much time? He asked. I don't know, but I'm going back to London tomorrow, and you're staying here, so we'll find out if this is real when there's distance between us. That sounds terrifying. It is terrifying, but if you're serious about this, about me, about us being something real, then you'll understand why I need it. The musicians were preparing for the next dance. Other couples were reforming. Marcus knew he should release her, step back, let her return to Caroline in safety. Instead, he said, I'll come to London. Not immediately. I need to finish the cottage construction and handle some estate business that can't be delegated. But in 2 weeks, I'll come to London, and I'll court you properly. No desperate improvisation, no invented house parties. Just me showing up, consistently, because that's what you deserve. 2 weeks. Is that enough time? It's a start. She stepped back, creating distance between them. Thank you for the dance, Your Grace. Marcus, please. If nothing else, call me Marcus. Her smile was soft. Thank you for the dance, Marcus. She returned to Caroline, leaving him alone on the edge of the dance floor, with his heart beating too fast, and the uncomfortable certainty that he'd just agreed to the most terrifying gamble of his life. 2 weeks, 14 days to finish what he'd started, to prove this wasn't just impulsive jealousy, to demonstrate he could be the person he'd shown her this week when real life and responsibility came flooding back. He just had to not ruin it first. The house party dissolved the next morning in a flurry of farewells and packed trunks. Oliver left first, pleading urgent business in town and grinning at Marcus with the insufferable smugness of someone who knew exactly what had happened at the ball. 2 weeks, he said as he climbed into his carriage. That's simultaneously very restrained and completely insane. Exactly what I'd expect from you. Thank you for your support. Always. Though I maintain my offer stands, if you ruin this through overthinking, I reserve the right to pursue her myself. You said you weren't. I'm not. But I enjoy threatening you. Oliver's expression turned serious. Don't mess this up. She's remarkable, and you're finally being an actual person instead of a walking title. Keep being that person. Marcus watched Oliver's carriage disappear down the drive, then turned back to face the remaining chaos. Lady Thornbury and Caroline were next, full of gratitude and barely concealed gossip. Mr. Whitmore departed looking relieved to escape, though he did manage a surprisingly heartfelt thanks to Beatrice, which left Isla. She emerged from the house with her travelling cloak and one small bag, Caroline having already taken the rest of her things. Marcus had planned an eloquent farewell speech. He'd prepared appropriate sentiments about gratitude and anticipation, and all the correct things one said when a house party ended. What came out instead was, I meant what I said. 2 weeks. I'll be in London. I know. She adjusted her gloves. I'm counting on it. And if I'm delayed, estate business, unexpected crises, all the things that usually interfere, then I'll know this was performance after all. But her smile was gentle. Don't be delayed. I won't be, Marcus. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the exact shade of her eyes, grey-green like the sea before a storm. This week was unexpected. I came here thinking I'd be watching you fumble through an invented house party. Instead, I saw something real. Someone real. Don't lose him in the next 2 weeks. I won't, I promise. Good. She rose on her toes and kissed his cheek, brief and chaste, and somehow more intimate than anything that had come before. 2 weeks. Then she was gone, climbing into the waiting carriage, and Marcus was left standing in his own driveway watching another person leave while he stayed behind to handle estate responsibilities. Except this time felt different. This time, he had a promise to keep, a purpose beyond duty and expectation, a reason to show up that had nothing to do with being the Duke of Aldridge and everything to do with being Marcus Greaves. "Well," Beatrice said, appearing at his elbow. "That was either very romantic or very stupid. Both, probably. Definitely both." She linked her arm through his. 2 weeks to finish the cottages, handle the estate business, and somehow prove you're capable of sustained attention and genuine courtship. No pressure. None at all. You're going to ruin it, aren't you? I'm certainly going to try not to. That's not exactly confident. It's honest, which seems to be my only remaining skill. Beatrice laughed. Then be honest. Be yourself. And please don't let some agricultural crisis convince you to stay here instead of going to London. She gave you 2 weeks. That's not negotiable time. That's a test. I know. Do you? Because you have a tendency to find reasons to avoid things that make you uncomfortable. And feelings, in case you hadn't noticed, make you profoundly uncomfortable. She wasn't wrong. Marcus had spent 12 years avoiding feeling, maintaining distance, choosing duty over connection because duty was safer and more predictable. But Isla had seen through all of that, had demanded better, had given him exactly 2 weeks to prove he could choose connection over comfort. He wasn't going to waste them. The next 14 days passed in a blur of focused productivity. Marcus threw himself into estate business with single-minded intensity, not as an escape, but as something to complete, so he could leave with a clear conscience. The cottages were finished ahead of schedule. The families moved in with gratitude that made his chest tight. He spent an entire day helping the family with 4 children arrange furniture in their new home, and the grandmother had cried while squeezing his hands and calling him a good boy. He was 32. He'd been Duke for 12 years, but somehow good boy felt like the highest praise he'd ever received. The estate business was managed, delegated, or postponed. His steward looked simultaneously relieved and confused by Marcus's sudden willingness to trust others with responsibility. His man of business made pointed comments about dukes who suddenly developed interests in London society. Beatrice watched all of it with barely concealed glee. "You're doing it," she said on day 13. "You're actually going. I said I would. You say a lot of things. You rarely actually do the uncomfortable ones." She hugged him suddenly, fierce and quick. "I'm proud of you." "For what? Going to London?" "I go to London constantly. For choosing someone over duty. For being a person instead of just a duke." She pulled back, her eyes suspiciously bright. "Don't ruin it by overthinking. Just show up and be yourself. What if myself isn't enough? Then she's an idiot. But she's not. So you probably don't need to worry." On the 14th day, Marcus climbed into his carriage with 1 bag, a carefully prepared speech he'd probably forget the moment he saw Isla, and the kind of nervous anticipation he hadn't felt since he was 17 and hopelessly infatuated with the ambassador's daughter. London was grey and crowded when he arrived. He went to his townhouse first, changed into clothes that didn't smell like travel, and tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Then he went to find Isla. The Brennan townhouse was in Mayfair, elegant and understated. Marcus stood outside for a full minute, gathering courage before finally knocking. The butler who answered looked unsurprised. "Your Grace, Miss Brennan is expecting you." "She is?" "She's been expecting you for 3 days, actually. Said you'd either arrive exactly on time or not at all." The butler's expression suggested amusement. "She's in the garden." Marcus followed him through the house and out into a small but beautifully maintained garden. Isla stood near a fountain, reading what appeared to be the same philosophy text from the conservatory. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was bright enough to hurt. "You came," she said. "I promised I would." "You did. But I wasn't entirely certain you'd keep it." She closed the book. 2 weeks, to the day. I wasn't going to risk being late. Or early. That seemed overeager. She laughed, that bright, unguarded sound. "So you calculated the exact moment of arrival to appear interested but not desperate." "I calculated nothing. I just drove here directly after handling everything that needed handling, so I could arrive exactly when I promised. That's either very romantic or very ducal. Can't it be both? I suppose we'll find out. She gestured to the bench beside the fountain. Sit with me. He sat. For a moment they were quiet, the sounds of London muffled by garden walls. Then Isla said, I've been thinking about what you said. At the ball. Which part? All of it, but especially the part where you said you had no idea if being honest was enough. She turned to face him. I think I have an answer. His heart was beating too fast. And? It's enough. You're enough. The awkward, honest version who shows me cottage plans and admits to desperate improvisation. She paused. But I need you to understand what you're choosing. What am I choosing? Me. Not the idea of me, not the possibility of me, not who you think I might be. The actual person with opinions you might not like and a tendency to call you out when you're being ridiculous and absolutely no interest in being a decorative duchess who stands quietly in ballrooms. I don't want a decorative duchess. Don't you? Because that's what most dukes want. Someone who enhances their image without requiring actual connection. I don't want most dukes' lives. I want a partner. Someone who sees me and demands better and doesn't let me disappear into duty. He reached for her hand, hesitated. May I? She offered her hand. He took it, the contact sending warmth up his arm. I'm choosing you, he said quietly. Not an idea. Not a possibility. You, sharp and intelligent, and completely unwilling to tolerate nonsense, even when the nonsense is mine, especially when the nonsense is yours. That's what I'm hoping for, actually. She studied him for a long moment. Then she said, I've been thinking too about what I want, and I've decided something. What? I want to be chosen, not won, not competed for, not claimed through desperate improvisation. She squeezed his hand. I want someone who shows up consistently, who sees me clearly, who chooses me every day, not because I'm convenient or appropriate or socially acceptable, but because being without me is worse than being uncomfortable. I can do that. Can you? Because it means letting me see you when you're uncertain, when you're struggling, when being the Duke is too heavy and you want to hide. She paused. It means being vulnerable. I know. And that terrifies you. Absolutely. But losing you terrifies me more. Her smile was soft and genuine. That's the right answer. So yes, Marcus. I'll accept your courtship. Your honest, awkward, utterly genuine courtship. She leaned closer. But I'm holding you to this version of yourself. No disappearing into ledgers, no hiding behind duty. If you're uncertain, tell me. If you're overwhelmed, tell me. Be present, even when it's uncomfortable. I will be. I promise. Then we'll see how this goes. They sat together in the garden, hands linked, and Marcus felt something settle in his chest. Not resolution exactly, but certainty. The kind that came from finally choosing feeling over safety, connection over comfort, being a person over performing a role. It was terrifying. It was also exactly right. Epilogue, 6 months later. The autumn gardens at Aldridge Manor were performing their usual show, trees turning gold and crimson, the air crisp enough to require shawls, and enough dramatic scenery to satisfy even Oliver's flair for aesthetics. Isla sat on a bench overlooking the maze, reading correspondence from her father, while Marcus reviewed cottage plans beside her. They'd fallen into this pattern over the last few months. Parallel existence, comfortable silence punctuated by random observations, and occasional debates about proper drainage systems. It shouldn't work. Most couples required constant entertainment, conversation, performance. But Isla liked the quiet, and Marcus liked having someone who didn't require him to be constantly ducal. Your father wants to visit, Isla said, looking up from the letter. That's fine. The guest rooms are always prepared. He wants to discuss marriage settlements. Marcus's pencil froze mid-sketch. Does he? Apparently watching his daughter be courted by a duke for 6 months without a formal proposal is testing his patience. She folded the letter. Though I told him I wasn't in any particular hurry. Weren't you? I wanted to be certain you wouldn't disappear back into your ledgers the moment courtship became comfortable. She smiled. You haven't, incidentally. Disappeared. I've been trying very hard not to. I've noticed. So has your sister. She keeps making pointed comments about rings and announcements and her desperate need for nephews and nieces. Beatrice has no sense of appropriate timing. Or she has perfect timing and you're just slow. Isla tilted her head. Are you planning to propose, Marcus? Or have I misunderstood the last 6 months entirely? He set down the cottage plans. I've been trying to figure out how to do it properly. Properly? Grand gesture, romantic setting, all the things I'm terrible at. He paused. I even asked Oliver for advice, which he found hilarious. What did he suggest? That I stop overthinking and just ask you. Apparently, straightforward honesty has been working remarkably well so far. Oliver is annoyingly wise sometimes. It's infuriating. Marcus stood, suddenly restless. I don't have a ring. I haven't arranged anything. This isn't how this is supposed to happen. How is it supposed to happen? I don't know, perfectly planned, romantic, something you'll remember fondly instead of as another example of me being awkward. Isla stood, moving to face him. Marcus, do you love me? The question landed with unexpected force. They'd been careful these last 6 months, affectionate, committed, but neither had spoken that particular word aloud, as if saying it would make everything too real, too vulnerable, too permanent. Yes, he said. Completely. Inconveniently. In a way that makes me understand why my grandfather built that ridiculous folly for my grandmother. Then ask me. Now? Right now? In your garden? With no ring and no grand gesture and absolutely no plan whatsoever. She smiled. Ask me the way you do everything else, honestly, awkwardly, and utterly genuinely. He took her hands. His heart was beating too fast. This wasn't how proposals happened in the novels Beatrice read or the society pages. This was just them, in a garden on an ordinary autumn afternoon, which somehow made it perfect. Isla Brennan, he said. I am terrible at grand gestures. I will probably always be better at showing affection through drainage systems than poetry. I will occasionally disappear into my work because I forget that other things matter. I will need you to remind me to be present, to be vulnerable, to be a person instead of just a title. So far, this isn't very romantic. I'm getting there. He squeezed her hands. But I will also show up every day, even when it's uncomfortable. I will choose you over duty, over comfort, over my natural inclination to hide behind responsibility. I will build you a dozen follies if you want them, or 0 if you'd prefer I focus on practical cottages. I will be whoever you need me to be as long as I get to be yours. She was smiling now, bright and unguarded. That's better. Will you marry me? Despite my awkwardness and my tendency to overthink and my complete lack of proper planning for this moment. Yes. No hesitation. No uncertainty. Just simple, devastating honesty. Yes, I'll marry you. Despite all of that. Because of all of that. He kissed her, finally, properly, the way he'd been wanting to for 6 months, but had been too uncertain to attempt. She kissed him back with equal enthusiasm and considerably more skill, which he filed away as something to tease her about later. When they broke apart, she was laughing. That was possibly the worst planned proposal in aristocratic history. I know. Your sister is going to be furious you didn't let her orchestrate something elaborate. She'll survive. And we'll have to tell my father you proposed without a ring or his permission. I'll get a ring. And his permission. Retroactively. That's not how it's supposed to work. Nothing about us has worked the way it's supposed to. Why start now? She laughed again, and Marcus felt something settle completely. This was right. Not perfect, not planned, not remotely ducal, but right in a way that mattered more than appropriateness ever could. I love you, she said, in case that wasn't clear from accepting your terrible proposal. I love you too, in case that wasn't clear from making a terrible proposal in the first place. They sat back down on the bench, closer now, Isla's head on his shoulder while Marcus tried to remember what he'd been working on before his entire life had changed. The cottage plan seemed less urgent suddenly, though Isla would probably have opinions about window placement, and discussing them would be infinitely more enjoyable than doing it alone. "So," she said after a comfortable silence, "when should we tell people?" Beatrice already knows. She's been watching from the morning room window for the last 10 minutes. Of course she has. We should probably go inside before she expires from suspense. Or we could stay here and let her suffer. That seems cruel. She invented an imaginary house party and trapped us together for a week. I think she can handle 10 minutes of suspense." Marcus laughed. "That week feels like a lifetime ago." "Does it? Sometimes I still can't believe you actually invented an entire house party just to compete with Oliver." "I wasn't competing with Oliver. I was desperately attempting to not lose something I'd been too stupid to value properly the first time." "That's a much better description." She squeezed his hand. "Though I'm glad you were stupid. Otherwise we wouldn't have had that ridiculous week, and I wouldn't have seen who you actually are beneath all the ducal correctness. So my incompetence worked in my favor. Your honesty worked in your favor. The incompetence was just entertaining." They sat together as the afternoon faded toward evening, and Marcus thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago, hiding behind duty, choosing correctness over connection, so busy being the Duke of Aldridge that he'd nearly missed the chance to simply be Marcus. He thought about Isla's patience, her willingness to demand better, her refusal to accept performance over presence. He thought about how close he'd come to losing all of this, because he'd been too comfortable in his careful isolation. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a 4th chance. For seeing through the desperate improvisation to what I was actually trying to say. For being patient while I figured out how to be a person. You were always a person, Marcus. You just needed permission to show it." She lifted her head to look at him. "Besides, I didn't give you a 4th chance. I gave you one real chance. Everything before that was just prologue. Then I'm grateful for the prologue, even the awkward parts. Especially the awkward parts. They're when you're most yourself." Beatrice appeared on the terrace, no longer content to watch from windows. "Are you two planning to sit in the garden all evening, or shall you come inside and share whatever news you're obviously hiding?" "We're engaged," Isla called. "Finally." Beatrice threw her hands in the air. "I've been waiting 6 months for him to stop being an idiot. Did he at least propose properly?" "He proposed perfectly," Isla said. "That's not what I asked. He proposed like himself, which is perfect for me." Beatrice descended the terrace steps, her expression caught between exasperation and delight. No ring, no grand gesture, just Marcus being awkward in a garden. "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "You're hopeless, both of you." But she was smiling as she hugged them. "Though I suppose if it works for you, that's all that matters." They went inside together, Beatrice already planning elaborate engagement announcements while Isla and Marcus exchanged amused glances, and Marcus felt the last piece of uncertainty dissolve. This was his life now. Not the perfect, carefully controlled existence he'd built over 12 years of being Duke, but something messier, more genuine, infinitely better. A life where he could be both the Duke of Aldridge and simply Marcus. Where duty and connection weren't opposing forces but complementary choices. Where being vulnerable wasn't weakness, but the foundation of everything that mattered. Where being seen, really seen, by someone who loved him anyway, was the grandest gesture of all. The end. Thank you for staying until the very end of Marcus and Isla's story. If you felt the awkward honesty, the slow burn, or the moment when someone finally chooses to be vulnerable, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite moment? The invented house party, the conservatory confession, that terrible but perfect proposal. If you enjoyed this story of choosing connection over comfort, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you never miss the next tale of love, growth, and people learning to show up for each other. You're the reason these stories exist. Thank you for being here.